today there is a huge discussion, not only in Latin America, but also in Europe and North America regarding the role of state. We think that the state is necessary. We think that paying taxes is better than not paying taxes. Could we live in a society without taxation? So this has not only to do with the economic analysis of taxation, efficiency, effectiveness, but also with this political meaning of sense of belonging in our political community.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel presented by Traces.Dreams. Today I have the great pleasure of talking to Dr. Jorge Atria, who is an expert in economic and fiscal sociology and social stratification. Jorge is based in Chile, where he works at the Universidad Diego Portales and the COES, which is the Center for Social Conflict and Cohesion Studies. Welcome to the program, Jorge.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation.
We're very happy to have you here because we want to talk today about inequalities, of course, and a new or old discussion that is resurging now about tax and specifically about wealth tax or taxation in general, inheritance taxation. Jorge, you've been researching these subjects, taxation-related, social inequalities-related issues for a long time. Could you tell us something about why this discussion is resurging today?
First of all, I would say that particularly in Latin America, we have had a long discussion regarding the role of state and how Latin American countries can face economic inequality. Therefore, the last 2 decades, I would say, there is an increasing interest in studying taxation. There are many studies showing that tax systems are unfair and regressive, so the tax burden tend to be higher for the poor and the middle class and lower for the rich. So with this economic evidence, social scientists have tried to analyze how this has a lot of consequences in terms of society, the citizenship, and the fiscal bond, the interactions between citizens. If you are a part of the middle class and you have a high tax burden and you see that the rich is not paying what they should, then you have a lot of questions regarding the state and justice. And it's very natural that you ask, why am I paying? And so sociology and social science in general have tried to understand the social, political, and cultural meanings of taxes in unfair societies, considering taxation not only as an economic issue, but also as a political issue. We are part of a political community when we pay taxes, and therefore it's also interesting to analyze these political issues of taxation.
You mentioned the fiscal bond. If you could explain quickly what you mean by that, and then relate it to what economists traditionally say that, we should have low taxes, and that is very beneficial for, or some economists say. Even the traditional model of taxation is that the median voter decides what taxation or redistribution should be like. The evidence is not necessarily indicating that this is right, but could you say something about this tax bond, fiscal bond that we have as a society?
We as citizens have a bond, and we can, as sociologists and social scientists, analyze our interactions in social life. But we also have a bond with the state, and the fiscal bond, our interactions with the state occur in everyday life. So we can analyze taxation not only as an economic strategy to extract resources from the part of the state, but also as a way to analyze how we interact as citizens and how we perceive the state, how we justify that the state takes money from us to invest in social service and social goods in general. So the fiscal bond has to do not only with economic issues, but also with a political link. We as citizens are part of a political community, and taxes are a way to concrete our relation. And in this sense, taxes are a very interesting point of view to examine this relationship between state and citizens and between citizens. And I think this is part of the contribution that sociology and anthropology can offer in terms of, for instance, moral recognition of the state. If we believe that the state is necessary, today there is a huge discussion, not only in Latin America, but also in Europe and North America regarding the role of state. We think that the state is necessary. We think that paying taxes is better than not paying taxes. Could we live in a society without taxation? So this has not only to do with the economic analysis of taxation, efficiency, effectiveness, but also with this political meaning of sense of belonging in our political community.
And with a very basic assumption of justice, right? So who can contribute how much or should contribute how much, which is where we get to some of the wealth taxes.
Yeah, normally the distributive justice and political philosophy have also analyzed. There are many studies dealing with distributive justice in general, but taxes are a way to concrete these debates. Who pays what and why? And I think all these discussions regarding wealth taxation have to do with these distributive justice questions in contemporary societies. There is evidence that inheritance plays a huge role in current societies, and we also know that that people is if people is inheriting much more, particularly some groups, that has consequences in terms of justice for the future. So wealth taxation, inheritance taxation can play a role in terms of reducing inequality and also providing fairer options to organize societies in the future.
And when you say the role of the state in this discussion and also the more philosophical part, maybe, what would be the role of the state in this discussion?
Well, we are living with this pandemic, and so there are more increasing demands for a higher state. So on one hand, there is a need to raise tax revenues to pay higher social expenditure, not only with debt but also with fiscal revenue. And on the other hand, I think this moment represents a critical juncture to rethink the role of state in more general terms and how more structural social problems can be resolved. So this has to do with a decreasing role of the state in the last decades. This is analyzed in Europe, Latin America. In Europe, it's the result of austerity policies in some countries, while in others has to do with other with permanent low redistribution, as for instance in Chile, Mexico, or other Latin American countries. So there is a question of the role of state. What should make the state in terms of inequality? What kind of burden we can have? So it is a question of the role of state and the responsibility of citizens. So are we willing to pay more taxes, or are we just thinking about more taxes for the rich? So it's always about our social organization as society and our burden and how we can imagine a different tax burden for the future.
So talking about this responsibility of the citizens, are we willing to pay more taxes?
I think we should, first of all, have a better tax consciousness. And Latin American countries normally have very low levels of tax consciousness.
What do you mean by that?
In Chile, for instance, 1/3 of the population don't know that they are paying right now taxes. For instance, the VAT. We all as citizens pay VAT in all goods that we consume, but we don't know that we pay VAT. So many people didn't recognize in a recent survey, 1/3, that they pay VAT. So if I don't know that I'm paying taxes every day, I can't be identified as citizens, just as a consumer. And therefore, we need more tax consciousness to understand that we are contributing right now to the state, We make the state active, and if we understand that we pay taxes, we can evaluate our state, we can demand more accountability, and we can discuss if we need to pay more taxes. But the problem in Latin America is that actually the middle and the lower class pay more taxes than the rich. So I understand that many people say, I don't want to pay more taxes. So part of the discussion is, okay, I maybe can pay more taxes, but the rich should also pay more. And I particularly, as an academic, I think I could pay more taxes.
Particularly, people overestimate the amount of taxes they pay. So everybody thinks they pay around 40% of their income in taxes, which is about double of what people on average pay. And of course, it's a lot higher for poor people who also think they pay 40% in taxes. So there is, as you say, there is not a particularly good consciousness about taxes. There is not a lot of information about taxes. There's also a very negative image of taxation in general. It's like a burden instead of being perceived as something like an investment or something like that. Do you think this is something Latin American, or is this something general, or how would you interpret this?
Well, Peter Sloterdijk, this German philosopher, wrote a book analyzing the perceptions, theoretically, he says the perceptions of German people on the state, on taxation. And he says that there is a very negative image of the state, and nobody wants to pay taxes. So I think this is a problem, a global problem, these perceptions. But I think we need more tax consciousness and also more tax statistics. So, of course, we know much more on income and wealth concentration than 1 or 2 decades ago, but we still need more transparency about who pays what. And this is a strategy to show the people that the rich actually don't pay much taxes. So governments should publish not only tax rates, but also, for instance, effective tax rates. That is how much specific groups really pay in taxes by type of tax, with detailed breakdowns within the top 10%, for instance, the top 1%, and within the wealthiest taxpayers. And this is also a problem, a global problem. There is still a huge opacity in these issues, and this makes it hard to have an informed and democratic debate about the tax systems and fairer public policy. So I think this is a problem not only in Latin America, and I'm pretty sure that if we have more information available and more studies showing the problems of inequality, we could increase tax consciousness, not only in terms of demanding more taxes for the rich, but also more taxes for the general society. We should discuss these issues, thinking about how could we organize a society without taxation, without state? What are the consequences, and which groups would eventually have more advantages?
I want to press you a little bit on this transparency issue. So do you think that if we have more information, which would clearly be very desirable, we could just raise the rates for the rich? I mean, everybody would just agree to that? Or do you think there could be obstacles? Leading question besides transparency? Reasons for why maybe rich people today don't pay much in tax, or not as much in taxes as they could or should?
I think transparency is necessary, and taxation is a way not only to increase resources for the state, but also a resource for demanding more transparency and accountability. States differ in terms of how they spend. There are important differences in terms of quality of spending, corruption, efficiency, but we should remember that an effective fiscal pact, which gives the state capacity to finance social service and reduce income and wealth concentration, includes this right of taxpayers, the right of taxpayers to demand more fiscal transparency and accountability. So one can, of course, I agree, one can criticize the quality of spending in some states, and much more is needed to improve that quality of spending and transparency. But there is also a need to have a higher control of inequality and higher provision of public goods. So we need somehow a leap of faith, as says Sven Steimo, and scholar.
I agree with the leap of faith. I think there is no other way of finding out because else they will keep on telling us that it won't work, right? And there's research by Young and others in the US about the supposed millionaire's flight, which indicates that actually millionaires are not fleeing when the tax rate is raised. So we might have to just try it out and see what happens. But do you think there could be resistance from some sectors towards raising the tax rates?
Sure, particularly the elites. Normally, surprisingly, the elites don't want to pay more taxes. But normally, this is analyzed in general terms in the world. So elites don't want to pay taxes. I think it's important to distinguish between elites that are nowadays paying more taxes than others. So it's not fair making this statement in Germany, in France, and Latin American countries. There are huge differences. Of course, all elites don't want to pay more taxes, but some elites are paying more taxes than others now. So we need fairer tax systems in all countries in the world, or most of the countries. But some countries have more critical problems than others.
So there are recently some movements of millionaires for tax paying, etc. And then there's also the new wealth tax in Argentina and in other countries that seems to be working reasonably well. How do you think this discussion is going to develop with these new examples? Is there hope for a fairer tax system in the near future in countries like Chile, for example?
We can see this debate very good analyzed, for instance, in the United Kingdom. There is this commission on wealth taxation, also in the European Union. And here I would see the pandemic with its negative effects as a critical juncture. The pandemic can only increase the problems, the debt, the social demands. There is an intensification of economic disparities and a larger percentage of the population without a job, and thousands of families returning to poverty. So I think this debate on higher taxes for the rich in many countries should lead to some solution or some positive result. Some countries discuss not about wealth taxation, but inheritance tax rate, higher inheritance tax rates. Others about taxation on capital gains. For instance, in Chile, there is this commission in UK, and they suggest a wealth tax for one time. This is also an option in the European Union. Some economists have tried to show this. So I think this should lead to some positive results, and I would see this as a critical juncture to achieve some modifications in the tax systems, not only to react to this pandemic, but also to achieve fairer tax systems in general, concerning the tax structure, the problems of regressivity, the low contribution of wealth taxation in general, etc.
Yeah, Mexico is the only country in the OECD that doesn't have an inheritance tax or any wealth tax for that matter, except for a very small property tax on the local level. How do you think a more fair and more progressive tax system with one of those reforms would look like, or should look like?
Well, we have some evidence from the middle of the 20th century. So the tax systems looked like fairer tax systems compared to the current ones. And so we don't need a high level of imagination to think, for instance, about tax progressivity. that was a reality in many countries 5 decades ago. So I would say that a fair tax system should be more progressive than most of the tax systems nowadays. Um, the last decades, we have had a long discussion. We can see in economic analysis, economic studies in general, um, that tax systems should be efficient, effective, and promote reinvestment and savings. But concerns of justice, distributive justice, and progressivity have not been so as important as 5, 6 decades ago. So tax systems, right? This current tax system should be more progressive. The income tax should have a higher role, a more important role. VAT or indirect taxation should have a secondary role. And of course, this has a lot of problems in terms of fiscal revenue. So for states, it's easier to get money from indirect taxation, um, and therefore we need to rethink the organization of tax systems to think about other possibilities to get the same money that some tax systems get now with indirect taxation, but with direct taxation, wealth taxation, and we should also take fiscal havens more seriously. It's not only a question of the tax system in each country, but also the international problems. At a global level, there is this problem of tax havens and profit shiftings and avoidance. So we should also think about a different organization of international justice, transnational organizations, and maybe some discussions of international enforcement to promote less avoidance and less evasion.
We know that Gabriel Zucman is now in the EU trying to fix this problem for the world. We hope that he'll be very successful. But do you know if there's any efforts currently to design this alternative in the region?
In Latin America, there are many groups, part of the new studies of taxation and the renowned interest in taxation in the last decades has to do with NGOs, social movements, demanding a new conversation on taxes. For instance, there are gender movements demanding a new organization of taxation considering the role of women. There is also this interest, this classical interest of distributive justice, and this interest in reforming international organizations to promote tax justice at a global level. So I would say Latin America is part of this conversation. We as Latin Americans have the difference that this is not an increasing problem, it's a persistent problem. So the fiscal pact has always been unfair. Regressive taxation has always been, not in all countries, but most of the countries have always had a fiscal regressive pact. So it's not just a return to 5 decades ago, but also to take advantage of this critical juncture and to see the examples of other countries to change our organization and to move towards a more progressive system. But that has never been possible. So it's a great challenge, I would say.
Yeah, we hope that academics like yourself and other researchers looking into these subjects will continue pressing on why this is the case and how we could change it. Jorge, what got you interested in this subject, sometimes perceived maybe as rather abstract or dry, researching taxes? What got you interested in researching this in the first place?
Well, the focus on elites has to do with my interest in inequality, and the focus on taxation was the same. I was interested in inequality dynamics, particularly reproduction of wealth and income inequality. I found many inspiring works in health, education, the effects of social policies in general on inequality, unequal access to social services, asymmetries in the labor market. But most of these works focus normally on the poor. And since inequality in contemporary societies is essentially relational, that is, it implies a lack of economic resources and economic accumulation at the same time and in the same context, I decided to pay attention to the role of state and public policies in reproducing instead of alleviating inequality. And here, I think the tax policy, tax systems are particularly relevant. And so I realized that studying inequality from above was also necessary to understand economic dynamics in capitalist societies in general, and the role of the tax systems in particular. And therefore, I think it's important to study elites.
Certainly a key piece, studying elites, studying taxation. Jorge, thank you so much for illuminating our perspective on taxes and giving us some hope that there will be more crucial information to change our very regressive current systems towards, hopefully in the near future, more progressive tax systems, fairer societies, and less unequal societies in general. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you, everybody, for watching another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel, and if you are interested in these subjects, inequalities and everything related, please leave us a comment or share our content or subscribe to our channel, and we hope to see you again next week for another episode of Future Frame TV. Have a nice afternoon. See you soon. Bye-bye.